But we start with the latest between Russia and Ukraine. Secretary of State Blinken addressed the United Nations on the potential conflict today, saying that while President Putin has dismissed the U.S.'s warnings, Russia has made all preparations for, quote, a massive military assault. For more, I want to bring in Nikole Killion and Olivia Gazis. Nikole is my teammate, CBS News congressional correspondent. Olivia is CBS News intelligence and national security reporter. Olivia, let's start with you. As we heard earlier, the Secretary of State addressed the United Nations today. What was your takeaway from that, and where does the State Department go from here?
Sure. Well, the Secretary's remarks today were brief but striking for a few reasons, Scott. For one, he reiterated what we've been hearing from senior government officials, which is that U.S. intelligence now indicates that Russia could launch a multi-pronged, significant attack on Ukraine within days, and that it could be even setting its sights on Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. He also laid out in what was new detail some of the ways in which Russia could be fabricating a pretext for an invasion, including, he said, a staged terrorist or drone attack, the invented discovery of a mass grave, and perhaps most notably, a fake or a real chemical weapons attack, which is not a detail that we have heard before. And in doing all of that, Blinken also pretty head-on acknowledged that there have been questions raised about the validity of U.S. intelligence here. And there was a clear reference to past pronouncements by the U.S. in this very UN chamber that, as we well know, were catastrophically not borne out on the ground. But he said today, I am here not to start a war, but to prevent a war. And that's what these disclosures are about. He invited his Russian counterpart to meet again in person overseas next week. And now we'll see if the Russians play ball.
All the while, tensions are noticeably, demonstrably increasing. Olivia, you reported that Russia has expelled the U.S. Deputy Chief of Mission. It's happening amid rising tensions, but I'm wondering what the significance of that specific decision is.
Sure. Well, for one thing, it doesn't bode particularly well for continued diplomacy. The U.S. Embassy in Russia is already operating with a skeletal staff because of a series of tit-for-tat expulsions by both sides that have taken place in recent years. But it also emerged a bit later today that this very official was actually expelled a week ago and is already back in the United States. So the fact that this expulsion was effectively kept under wraps for that length of time, while presumably the diplomatic machine kept churning, may mean that now that machine is slowly grinding to a halt. U.S. officials called this move unprovoked and escalatory, and that it's going to require a response from the United States. And the news of it happened to emerge just as we heard that the Russians submitted their written response to the U.S. set of proposals that were sent to Moscow last month. And while the Russian response did say in writing that Moscow does not intend to invade Ukraine, it also said that the failure by the United States to seriously address its security concerns meant that Moscow was now going to have to respond with military technical measures. It's not at all clear what that means. Vladimir Putin has used that phrase before, but what it doesn't bode well for is continued diplomatic engagement.
Nikole, if Congress wants to send a message to Russia, the lack of a decisive, unified message at the Capitol on sanctions seems to be muddling whatever message Congress could send. It seems like Congress could be left with little more than a strongly worded letter to Vladimir Putin. What's the state of play at this hour there?
Well, at this point, the latest state of play is that you have a bipartisan group of senators that is trying to put forth a resolution in order to send that strong, clear message from Congress. Earlier this week, we saw a bipartisan group led by Senate leaders issue a statement basically expressing solidarity with Ukraine. This resolution, in effect, would uphold Ukraine's independence and its ability to defend itself against a Russian invasion. That's some of the language in this resolution, which, again, is mostly symbolic, doesn't necessarily have any teeth. But, many lawmakers would insist that more or less, this is really about trying to send that clear signal. And even though, as you very well know, Scott, that lawmakers were not able to agree on a sanctions package over here in the Senate, that they do feel that they are still speaking with one voice. So that is the intent behind behind that bipartisan statement we saw earlier in the week from leaders Schumer and McConnell. Now this resolution, it's unclear if it will definitely get a vote before lawmakers recess. That was the intent, but there are still some last-minute changes in terms of language and the like. But again, the hope is that they can at least get that on the record as well to express their support for Ukraine.
That's America's message. Olivia, what is NATO doing, or what message is NATO making in the meantime?
Sure. Well, it so happens that as all of this is unfolding, the NATO defense ministers, including U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, were in Brussels today for an aptly timed annual meeting. And top of the agenda was, of course, how to address and respond to this ongoing crisis. The NATO Secretary General has said that there's consideration being given to further reinforcements to NATO's eastern and southeastern flanks. That could include standing up a new battle group in Romania, and it's rumored but not yet official, some reinforcements being sent to Bulgaria. These could precede any sort of Russian invasion as a deterrent measure, and they could also become permanent because officials are increasingly worrying out loud that living under this looming threat of a Russian military invasion may just be a new normal for Europe. So what that also means is that it's not out of the realm of possibility that more U.S. troops could be sent to bolster NATO's defenses. We got word today that the last of the 5,000 troops that the Pentagon sent to Poland arrived. And the U.S. ambassador to NATO was asked earlier this week, are further deployments on the table? She said at the time she didn't have any details to share, but she didn't definitively rule it out.
So, Nikole, as NATO and the White House and Congress grapple with the situation in Ukraine, Congress is also in the 11th hour of yet another continuing resolution, and the shutdown is looming. It felt like a day of uneven progress. What's the latest you're hearing?
Well, the bottom line is no one here wants a shutdown. They've been pretty clear about that, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side. But, Republicans are hoping to use this as an opportunity, as they have with past SCRs, to try to get some of their priorities, get attention for some of their priorities. So many of them have been pushing for various amendments before they sign off on this continuing resolution. And so as it stands, there are votes that have been taking place on some of those amendments. For instance, one amendment deals with prohibiting funding for institutions that are still requiring COVID-19 mandates in the federal government, those remaining mandates that remain on a federal level. So that is something that Senator Lee had been pushing for, defunding those types of initiatives. You also have folks like Senator Ted Cruz, who have also been pushing to strip funding, for instance, from schools and child care centers that require COVID-19 vaccines for kids. So those are kind of some of the issues that Republicans are trying to bring to the fore. Another concern that some Republicans had was providing federal funding for drug paraphernalia. That was a big sticking point or controversy earlier in the week until the Department of Health and Human Services clarified that they have a grant program that in effect does not provide federal funding for drug paraphernalia, even though they do have a grant program that does assist substance abusers. So, all of these little things have kind of been hiccups in the process, but the bottom line is that we do expect the government to be funded. That is something that both Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell have made clear is their intent. So, as you mentioned, as with all things in Congress, this is one of those things that continues to come to the 11th hour, and that's another reason why many lawmakers up here are making the point they don't want to keep going through these short-term fixes. And so part of the reason they even have to do this is because they are working on a longer-term fix. They hope by early March that they can have an omnibus spending bill that will fund the government through the rest of the fiscal year. That's the hope. So really this continuing resolution is just to buy them a little more time.
Time for one more question for you, Nikole. President Biden's top advisors, Ron Klain, Cedric Richmond, were at the Capitol today meeting with Senate Democrats. What have you heard came of those meetings?
Yeah, well, a lot of this was to talk about the president's priorities and his agenda over the next couple of weeks. As you know, he's got a big speech coming up here, the State of the Union. So according to a White House official, that was certainly one of the topics of discussion, as well as, the president's agenda and priorities going forward, and really highlighting the things that the administration and Democrats have accomplished thus far. That really is going to be the focus and the theme that you will likely hear hear not only from the White House, but from Democrats in the coming week. And they did also talk about, this issue of inflation, of price increases, how they're going to deal with that as a party. Also, for inquiring minds, there was some discussion of the Supreme Court process. As you know, President Biden continues his deliberations and has made clear that he intends to announce a nominee by the end of this month. So it doesn't seem like White House officials were giving too much on that front. Most lawmakers we spoke to and senators said, they tried to pry it out of these officials, but weren't able to get too far in terms of timing or name. But what many Democratic senators did tell us is that they do feel confident that the president will be able to meet this deadline and timetable of naming a nominee by the end of the month. They feel very confident that is going to happen. Some going so far as to say they think that the president may have settled on someone. Senator Manchin told reporters earlier today it seemed like, in his view, they might have already had somebody in mind. And so that is of interest, of course, to us. But, there were other lawmakers we talked to who said they feel like the president is still deliberating. So, it's all about reading the tea leaves up here. But, bottom line, this was just to lay out the path forward, what we'll see from the president over the next couple of weeks, which, again, includes a lot of attention on the Supreme Court nominee and, of course, the president's economic agenda.
Nikole Killion, Olivia Gazis, excellent reporting from both of you. Thanks to both of you.